Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. We will be starting in 2 minutes.
Okay.
All right, everyone. How are you doing today? Can you hear me? Please use the chat window on either Zoom or in YouTube if you're watching on YouTube to just introduce yourself, tell folks where you're from. We'll be using the Q&A function in Zoom as well as the chat window function in YouTube to be able to respond to questions today. But today I'm excited to introduce a special conversation with Brandon Martin about racial equity in college athletics that will be facilitated by my colleague and good friend, Dr. Frank Harris III. We're so glad that so many of you were able to join today. We realize that this is getting close to the end of the academic year and people are winding down, but it's never a bad time for a conversation on equity. And we know that these conversations are even more important given our national climate. And so I want to begin by introducing our two speakers today. The first, who you know very well, and that's Dr. Frank Harris III. Dr. Harris is a professor of post-secondary education and co-director of the Community College Equity Assessment Lab, SEAL, at San Diego State. In addition to serving as a professor and co-director of SEAL, Harris is a senior strategist in the Division of Campus Diversity and Student Affairs. In this role, he advises the division on efforts to institutionalize equity and designs innovative professional learning experiences to build equity-mindedness among faculty and staff. He is best known for his expertise in racial inequity in post-secondary education and has made important contributions to knowledge about college student development and the social construction of gender and race in college contexts. His work prioritizes populations that have been historically underrepresented and underserved in education. He's published in leading journals across the field and has regularly disseminated his scholarship through refereed conference presentations, conference proceedings, workshops, symposia, and has delivered more than 1,000 academic and professional presentations throughout his career. Welcome, Dr. Harris. Good to see you. Glad you're here this morning.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you all for joining.
And then to our second speaker, it is Dr. Brandon Martin. Dr. Martin is the Vice Chancellor and Director of Athletics at UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is amazing to consider that he is shepherding two different roles at the same time at one institution. That's a powerful contribution. He began his tenure there in December of 2018, and under his leadership, he's helped to change the culture within Kansas City athletics with his positive energy, passion, and strategic vision. He has helped to transform the campus through a number of different changes, which have led to a 91% graduation success rate and a 3.4 GPA for overall student athletics. He's launched the RU Athletic Fund, an annual giving arm for athletics, increasing donor participation by 380% and raised $2.1 million during 18 months from the launch of the program. He's navigated the change from the Western Athletic Conference to the Summit League and numerous other changes. In May of 2020, Chancellor has selected Dr. Martin as a committee chair of UMKC Forward, a campus-wide COVID-19 strategic initiative aimed at revisioning and re-envisioning UMKC in regards to efficiency, growth, innovation, and revenue generation. In September 2020, he was promoted to the role that he's currently in. And in this role, he has paired athletics and his athletic leadership with his role in academic leadership as well. He has held numerous positions, but prior to attending Kansas City, he served as the director of athletics at California State University Northridge, and was there for a number of years, leading some high power changes in that institution as well. And so we're privileged today to have two people who have their work rooted in equity, who are focused on how that applies to the athletic context. And we're so grateful that you're here today. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague and good friend, Dr. Frank Harris III, to get us started off. And again, we'll be monitoring the chat window, the Q&A function, as well as YouTube throughout this. So please feel free, post your questions. This is an opportunity to hear from a leader in athletics who also is committed to racial equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wood, for the wonderful context setting you've done. Thank you all of our colleagues who are logged in and attending. Thank you all so much to be here. And this is a special moment for me because Dr. Martin and I go back 20 plus years. So we used to work together at the University of Southern California. When I met him, he was just sort of finishing up a career, professional career as a basketball player, and was transitioning to USC as a graduate student. And so I was a new professional working in student affairs. And so we connected, and we have been connected and ever since, both personally and professionally. And so I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to facilitate this conversation. I know there's some of you who probably know him and know him pretty well, know him through his work, but I also know that there's probably quite a few folks who are just getting to meet him today. And so what we hope today's conversation will do is kind of help intersect, sort of bring two important conversations together. The conversations that Luke and I have been leading around racial equity in community colleges for the past decade, and the important work around student equity and student success in college athletics that Dr. Martin has been involved in and very much been a national leader in, as you can tell from his impressive bio. And so I want to start, as part of what we have to do is talk about this book, right? Leading in the Unknown, a new paradigm for leaders in intercollegiate athletics. And I think we can say that the work of any leader, anyone that's leading an organization, especially someone that's leading organizations within higher education, the last year has certainly brought about a new paradigm. It has challenged us to think about our work differently, to reimagine the ways in which we ready and prepare our organizations to do the critical work that is necessary to make sure that students are healthy, safe, and successful, and colleagues also, right? It's, we're all a part of this organizational ecosystem that's impacting us all. And so the first question I have for you, Dr. Martin, is what inspired you to write this book, and why is it so critical at this time?
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to just first start out with just thanking you, Dr. Harris, and also Dr. Wood for providing this platform. I also want to thank the folks at San Diego State who have been good allies and good partners. JD and his team have done a phenomenal job with a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. But I would be remiss if I didn't provide that shout out to JD, and also thank you and Luke for this platform. If we think about the motivation, if we think about the genesis of this book, it was a passion project in this period of the unknown. And it was focused around the economic depression, of course, the global pandemic, but it was also focused on the societal injustice that we've endured and had challenges with, and had to mold and shape, but more importantly, educate our student athletes about, within that space. This book was a book of therapy. I found myself down in my basement. Now I have a basement that I live in Kansas City. In California, I didn't have a basement, but I have a basement. So, at the onset of this, I found myself having to make decisions without a precedent. I had more questions than answers. And, I found myself really challenged with trying to figure out how I was going to deal with no fans, how I was going to deal with a 34% operational decrease in my budget, how I was going to deal with the issues with layoffs and furloughs where I had to eliminate or at least make adjustments with 40% of my team. And also the motivation for this book was, we had some tough periods last summer, with the events leading up to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. And so it was, again, going back to, this was a passion project, but it was a chance for me to leave an indelible mark on the industry. And I felt like, after having journaling, and I journaled for a month, maybe 6 weeks. And I had 77 pages of just thoughts, memories, reflections, challenges, fears. And I felt like I needed to convert that over to a book. And so that's what I did. But I didn't want to do that without having some additional data. Mm-hmm. So what I did was interview 23 of my colleagues who were athletic directors, who were conference commissioners, and other leaders within this intercollegiate athletic space, and figure out how they were dealing with things in this period. And so I wanted to know how they were dealing with budgets. I wanted to know how they were communicating with donors. I wanted to know how they were making adjustments with their respective strategic plans that they had in place. But more importantly, I wanted to know how they were handling their student athletes. Mm-hmm. And so with that, I made a commitment to write this book. And I felt like I needed to do it while I had a little time in this basement to figure things out. And, it turned out to be a remarkable project.
Yeah. Thank you. Sounds like it. It sounds like what it allowed you to do when you think about what Luke and I, we call the twin pandemics, the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the pandemic around systemic racial oppression, and how they converged in such a, salient way, and such a visible and transparent way. And so what it seems like for you is that those events, the convergence of those events, coupled with the responsibilities you have, not only as an athletics director, but as an educational leader, as an educational executive, that, it provided you an opportunity to really think critically about reimagining the ways in which we do business as educators. And so with that, you talked about interviewing athletic directors across the country, which I think is impressive. But what can you, for our particular audience, I would say most of the folks who are here are tuned in because they're really drawn to the work around racial equity. And so the question I would have is, what does your book teach us about racial equity in college athletics? Are there some things that from reading it that we'll learn, some practices, some strategies? What are some insights you could offer in that regard?
Sure. I'm going to offer a few with this question, Frank, and I think
Yeah.
some kind of bleed into some of the other questions you might have moving forward.
Okay. Yep.
The number one thing that I wanted to do is to focus on the Black student athlete. I have a heavy focus on a Black student athlete in chapter 6, where I talk about cultural safety. Patty Phillips from Women's Leader, she's the CEO and president of Women's League. She's featured as the case study in that chapter. But as pertains to the Black student athlete, I think it's important to understand that when you talk about the funding that the NC2A gets, which is this past year in 2020, it was $827 million due to the television contract with CBS and Turner. And so when you think about that, you think about the impact of the Black student athlete that impacted that and have made a contribution to that. And so in this period of the unknown, I wanted to talk to student athletes, but I also wanted to really underscore the fact that in leading in this unknown, it was important that student athletes understood societal injustice, that they understood or at least prioritize reward and return, right? Which lends itself to name, image, and likeness. We'll talk about later. But really speaking about some of the things that they need to be focused on in this period. This summer was, we had a number of different disappointments, but we also had some opportunities for our Black student athletes to seize this opportunity to understand their true power in this space, given their contribution. And I've really focused on the Black Lives Matter movement. That was heavy. That was heavy this summer, continues to be heavy. But it was important for me to talk about how the Black student athletes should use their voice. Of course, they had some successes with Kylan Hill in Mississippi by removing the Confederate flag within the Mississippi state flag. And there were a lot of other things at Power 5 schools where some student athletes made some strong statements about some of the things that they wanted to be changed. Outside of the student athletes, I profiled six case studies. 4 of those case studies were ADs, and those ADs were predominantly African American, and they talked about their journeys. They talked about the hardships. They talked about how it was tough being denied opportunities in different spaces where they felt that they were discriminated against. And I felt like that was profound, and that was really good for them to share. But the other thing is I really point out things related to cultural comfort. I really bring out things related to cultural safety, and also cultural agility. Yeah. And with those 3 things, as related to all 6 of the profiles, they really chronicled their careers and really offered some things that they had to do to be able to navigate themselves into the chair or their respective senior level position moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to pick up on this a little bit. So the next thing I was going to ask you was, what do you think are the 2 to 3 most, pressing issues related to racial equity in college athletics? And you talked about the student athlete voice, right? Particularly the voices of Black student athletes, which I think is critical. You highlighted name, image, and likeness, which I think, I didn't think we would make it, beyond 15 minutes into this conversation without name, image, and likeness coming up. So, we're going to talk about that. But just really briefly, you used the concept cultural safety a couple times already. And then I think as a follow-up, you said cultural agility. And then there was a third one that I forgot, cultural
agility, right?
It was safety, agility, and there was one other that I can't recall.
Safety, agility.
So maybe it's just those two. Oh, cultural comfort. Yeah.
Comfort.
So could you just, give us a quick kind of operational definition of what each of those means? So if you had to say, folks say, well, what exactly is that? Just really briefly what they are.
Yeah. So I'll start with cultural safety. And we talk about cultural safety. All of the questions that I posed to the administrators was all about, how are you dealing with this period of the unknown in regards to how you communicate to your coaches. And there's a lot of racial dynamics in that. So, And so if you are a Black athletic director, but you might deal with a white male coach, how are you being cognizant of how you need to communicate in that space as a Black male administrator, right? Mm-hmm. The cultural agility piece is all about how can you reach across different parts of the organization, parts of the department, and be able to really match cultural aspects of the relationship. I give an example. One of the things that where I had some challenges with a coach at my previous institution was that I didn't do a good job of understanding cultural agility. I didn't move in a way where I was cognizant enough to predict maybe some of the things that might have been communicated to me. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, I don't think that my cultural agility acumen was where it needed to be. Mm. And cultural comfort, is really all about how comfortable are we making folks within our organization, our department? How are we making our student athletes comfortable with conversations from coaches, with conversations from academic advisors, maybe a conversation with the athletic director? How are we being aware of that cultural comfort? Because we all come from different backgrounds. We all have our different lenses on life. And so how do we prioritize cultural comfort in a way that parallels with the mission and the core values of what the department is all about?
Now, this one on comfort, I think it really resonates with me because if I've learned nothing about racial equity or, conversations about race, the one thing I do know about them is that there's nothing comfortable about engaging it, right? And so I think sometimes, and Luke and I see this often in working with, having the privilege of working with literally hundreds of colleges across the country, that conversations about race, racism, racial equity, they tend to be silenced or stifled because we sometimes enter those conversations with the expectation that we want to talk about these things, but we want to feel comfortable talking about them. Yeah. And there's nothing comfortable about it, right? And so much of what we have to do and the work that Luke and I do is that we have to kind of help prepare folks, especially those who are in leadership positions, whose responsibilities is to create the conditions for these conversations to happen. Lesson number one is not going to be comfortable, right? So you got to have solid principles. You got to have solid values, right? You got to have all these things that are aligned with your goals around racial equity and racial justice. to lead you and guide you in that space.
Yeah.
And so you talked about two critical roles. You talked about coaches, and you talked about athletics advisors as kind of being key folks. And we know the vast majority, well, we know for certain, the vast majority of coaches don't identify, at least certainly at the university level, don't identify as people of color, right? And I would imagine that there's probably more representation amongst advisors, but there's probably somewhat of a disparity there as well, right? Between the students that they're engaging and serving and who they are. And so we're talking about folks who are in a position of leadership and influence that may not have a lived experience that relates to what it means to be a, Black or Indigenous person of color. And so as a leader in this space, how do you, what are your expectations of folks, and how do you, really the question is, how do you prepare, let's start with coaches. How do you prepare coaches who may not have a shared identity or lived experience to really be able to support like the student athletes through some of these racial justice issues and concerns?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did this past summer, Harris, is I started a Rise Alliance department, and under this umbrella of the Rise Alliance was a piece where we had some very candid, upfront conversations about how the coaches needed to really seize this opportunity to continue to build trust with their student athletes. And then also conveying to them that this is part of their jobs, right? It's important. This is part of their job to know the kids that they recruit beyond just the name on the back of their jerseys and their numbers. And so that's important. And not to just, put so much on coaches, but I think most of the coaches, at least in my department, they received it well. They received it well. And they understand the importance of taking care of their kids. They also understand the importance of, making sure that in taking care of the kids, building in that team culture, right, that's going to aid in them being successful, not only on the court or the field, but also in the classroom. And so the coaches are always looking for that competitive edge. And some are better in these spaces. But I think in this period, one of the findings in this book, Frank, was the importance of over communication. And so when we talk about leading in this unknown period, the standard way to communicate, right, was mostly in person. And of course, we've all made necessary adjustments on Zoom. How do you go beyond that, right? Just to make sure that the coaches understand your position, that the coaches feel that you have their back with these efforts. And then also circling back with the student athletes to make sure that they feel comfortable with a lot of the things that we're trying to set forth.
So I appreciate your response. And I think, you did a good job of kind of sort of just laying out, right? How do you bring coaches along, right? Thinking about this as a process. It's not something that happens overnight per se. And you got to have, and what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Martin, is you have to pair first and foremost expectations, right? So a coach has to understand this is what's expected of you. And then also with, sort of facilitating their growth and development and building their capacity to do it. But we had a question that was posed in the chat that's going to require us to pan out a little bit and think about the larger department, right? The culture of the larger athletics department at most institutions. And paraphrasing the question, it basically says, we see a lot of departments release these statements that say, hey, we support Black Lives Matter. We stand in solidarity with, our Black community, this, that, and the other. And it's not just athletics departments. We see institutions do it, entire institutions, but there's often a disconnect between the statement and the rhetoric and then what actually is done, right? And so the person who poses this question saying, you'll have a department that says we stand in solidarity, we support, Black lives and so forth, but you could also have a coach that's dismissive and has a negative reaction to student athletes using their voice in a way that's productive, but that is about advocacy and activism. They may not be comfortable with that. And so the question is, how can you as an athletic director help coaches to be more informed about social advocacy, about allyship, but be informed in a way where they don't necessarily feel like it's a threat to them, a threat to their authority, where they're losing control and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, I think that we got to remember, this is all a part of their, or should be at least part of their job duties.
Right.
So many times coaches, they come into higher education, come to a respective college campus, and they sort of, they're on an island within the athletic department, and yeah. They focus on winning games, and they focus on their team, and they focus on a lot of different things.
That was the model for a long time, right?
It was.
Right.
It was. But I think it's important for more athletic directors to stretch themselves and to build the trust with the coaches. Okay. And the coaches is really critical, Dr. Harris, from a standpoint, is because the head coaches are the first point of contact with these kids before they get to whatever university. And so they have that relationship with the student athletes. But there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done with coaches, even outside of this issue, for them to understand exactly how does this tie into what I'm trying to do with my respective program? How does this match with the mission of the athletics department? And then also explaining how it matches and parallels with a lot of the things that are within the mission of the larger campus. I think that piece is important, with the understanding that it's a work in progress. If you've been an AD for any amount of time, you understand you're not going to get all 16 coaches on board at once.
Right.
But it's important that you get the most important coaches, which might be your flagship coaches, your revenue coaches, get them on board so that they can be sort of spokespeople to carry out a lot of the different things that you want to do in your department. I think that's important, but it's a everyday effort, Frank. So a lot of times these things are spoken about in coaches meetings, and they're talked about maybe from a sport administrator standpoint, but it's important that the AD is hands-on in these type of efforts and endeavors.
Yeah. See, I appreciate what you're sharing there. So I've been at San Diego State now for 14 years, right? I've been there quite a while. And something good happened this past December, actually, where the athletics director at my institution, right, John David Wicker, asked me to come and lead a conversation with the entire department, right? Not just, with some folks here and there, with the entire department about racial equity. First time that had ever happened in my time at San Diego State. And I think what that does, when it's a department-wide conversation, when everybody is expected to at least be present, when the entire leadership of the department talks about it, that recognizing that we all have some learning and growth to do, I think that sets the bar higher in terms of what we can expect of coaches in this regard. And like you said, it's not an overnight process. We are, you have some coaches that have been working in the profession for a long time that don't have the skill set, that don't have the capacity, they don't have the language. And so you have to continue to to foster their growth and development. But I think that sort of speaks to the shift in context that has occurred post, 2020 and the events that have happened. To ask you another question, so you and I have two, I don't necessarily know if we can call them friends or colleagues, you're certainly mentors, but we have in common Dr. Sean Harper and Dr. Estella Bensamo, right? Who you and I have known for a long time. And they wrote a piece back in 2005 that talked about the importance of race-conscious leadership, is what it was called, right? And they, in that they talked about the importance of leading an institution, leading the department through a race-conscious lens, right? Really prioritizing and foregrounding race as you make sense of the entire landscape and as you make leadership decisions that impact the overall growth and development and advancement of the organization, right? They say that it's critical that you do that, especially if we're talking about racial equity. So my question is, what does race-conscious leadership recognize the goals of racial equity? What does that look like in athletics? So, we know what it looks like in the work that Luke and I do, but what does that look like in college athletics to lead from a race-conscious perspective?
Yeah, well, I think it starts from the top, Dr. Harris, from a standpoint of, I think the athletic director, I think the AD needs to be in lockstep with the president and the chancellor. But also the AD has to be able to convey this down to their respective executive teams, and be able to make a commitment that they're going to make a large part of their decisions off from a racial conscious lens. I think that's important to make sure that when they're making those decisions, that there's some sort of space for respect for difference, right? And a respect for different cultures, different ideas, understanding what allies that are in place on campus. And I think that's important. But we can say all of this, Frank, but the whole point is that we have to make a commitment to that, right? And so I think that needs to even permeate down to our coaches, right? And then there needs to be some accountability towards that.
But what happens when there's a disconnect between racial equity, being race conscious, and the business model and what alumni and donors expect, right? There can certainly be a disconnect. Often those there's not shared values, right, between those two things at times. How do you negotiate that? How do you deal with that as an athletics director without compromising some things that are important to you?
Yeah, I think it's case by case, Frank, because I think every athletic director has a different, unique set of stakeholders. Donors are different places. And I think you have to be able to take it in incremental steps. I think you have to have realistic expectations going in to that situation, because we understand that everyone's not going to be on board. Okay. And so to some degree, it's one of those things where no good deed goes unpunished in a sense. We're trying right. And so I think it's one of those things where you have to prioritize it, but you have to be so diligent and so passionate and focused on making that thing happen that it is going to take time. And I know for a fact that a lot of athletic directors, they sort of, go in and out of what defines success in their athletics department, right? And so is it the things that we're talking about right now in terms of really trying to build that that consciousness that you referred to, Frank, or is it about winning football games and winning basketball games and bowl games? So I know that that's a difficult conversation to have, but that's just the reality of our jobs.
Let me share something that we tend to struggle with in California, particularly in our California community colleges. So athletic programs are unique here in community colleges. So they're not scholarship programs. So student athletes, they don't get, full scholarships and things like that you can get in other states and certainly get within the university. And so sometimes you get a critical mass of student athletes, often Black males who are in football and basketball that may come from Texas, that may come from Florida, that may come from out of state, although not exclusively from out of state, but it tends to be more salient among student athletes in men's basketball and football who come from out of state. And they come here with the hope and expectation they'll be able to compete. They'll be able to, play at a local community college, college in the state, and that they'll be able to transfer, right? And things will be seamless. But what we often see are chronic issues related to basic needs and securities. So guys being homeless, guys being food deprived, food insecure, guys not having transportation, right? Just real chronic concerns in this regard related to basic needs. And so I can't, for me as someone who studies racial equity, I see that almost exclusively through the lens of racial equity. And so what advice would you have for colleagues in California who are running athletic programs, who are working with student athletes? But how do you sort of bring all the pieces together, all with the goal of making sure that student athletes are, again, where we started with, the conversation we started with, safe, healthy, well, and have a high likelihood of success?
Yeah, well, my first thought, Frank, is that, it has to be tied into the overall mission statement. It all has to connect with the guiding principles. Mm-hmm. It all has to tie into the personal priorities and a lot of the goals set within that respective year. I do think that there is some value in creating some subcommittee or some committee that's dedicated to just what you just described. Mainly, those folks are going to be folks in student development, folks in academic affairs. Most of those people are going to be involved in that. With that, I would also involve the director of compliance, and also make sure that the sport administrator is involved in that, as well as the athletic director. And I don't think that there's one specific answer to that, but I do think that could be a one step towards trying to eradicate a lot of those issues that you pointed out.
Do you think it's, I don't want to use the word coincidental, but I think the fact, how do we unpack and understand the fact that this tends to be, these are issues with across programs and sports, but it tends to be especially salient amongst men's basketball and football, right? Which we know are not necessarily revenue generating sports in community colleges, but they certainly are, in some athletic programs, although that's probably, that's probably another conversation for another workshop about what actually is revenue generating and so forth. But help us kind of unpack the implications around racial equity with the fact that it is young men, young Black men, especially in those sports, that tend to experience this the most.
Yeah. Well, I think we can't escape from the fact that this is mainly a K through 16 issue.
Right. Yeah.
And so when that happens, and they get to a place like San Diego State, or they get to a place like UMKC,
if they're lucky, right?
If they're lucky, so let's just assume that they are.
Right.
we're sort of expected to to fix a lot of the things that went wrong before they came on campus, and not only fix it, but we have to very quickly diagnose what all of those issues are, right?
Mhm.
And we know at the core of a lot of those issues is trauma. We know that there's a lot of trauma that these young men come to higher education with, and that needs to be dealt with. Okay.
Mhm.
And so when here's the other piece. Now that they understand that they have some challenges, and that the administration understands they have some challenges, I think it's important to be able to have more representation within the administration structure, to be able to aid in just those conversations that those kids need to have, just to build that trust, just to have a sense of something that's, or a person that's familiar, that they can have that conversation with and be able to be transparent with before they get to, of course, maybe a mental health person, a counselor. It's important that they see more representation in their environments, which is a whole nother thing. But I think that aids in their level of comfort, and then their confidence in being safe.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a couple, Frank, there's a couple things that I do want to just single out, and you alluded to it earlier, about the 2 to 3 things that most pressing issues in our
Mhm.
sports that we have. One, I think we have this overrepresentation of Black student athletes in revenue generating sports, but we do have an underrepresentation of folks who are at a higher level, right? And when I mean higher level, that's the athletic director, that could be a senior associate AD, and even all the way up to the president or chancellor level. Okay, so that's problematic. So we have a lack of men and women of color who are in the AD chair. Um, Out of the 130 FBS schools, there's only 22 ADs that are of color, 13 of which are African American. One of the reasons that we have that issue is that we have people who are making decisions off of comfort versus talent, and I think that's important to note.
Well,
The other thing is we have a lack of conference commissioners. When you look at the 10 FBS conferences, there's only 2 Black men who hold those positions. So that's problematic. We also have,
Dr. Martin, when you say FBS for audience that may not
yeah,
necessarily.
those are just all the football playing schools at the division level.
Got it.
Okay, yeah.
So it's where it's. Is it fair to say that those are your big money programs and conferences?
Well, most are big money. You have the Power Fives in that, but those are the schools that are competing heavily in football. Okay, so for example, UMKC is not an FBS school. Okay,
Right. Okay.
and so, but San Diego State is, right? So those are FBS. The lack of college presidents and chancellors. Out of the 130 at the FBS level, there were 108, and this is all in 2020, who were white, which is not a great number. The other piece is that we strongly have to look at the return and the reward for the Black student athlete. And again, I spoke earlier about that in terms of the name, image, and likeness, and getting them to understand that this is an opportunity where they need to understand their leverage and their opportunity to really get a lot of the things that they want. I mean, we had a lot of momentum starting in the summer, where we had a lot of the Black student athletes who wanted name changes on buildings. We had a lot of the Black student athletes who were holding out from practices. We had a lot of different things that, I mentioned Kylan Hill. We had some successes, but things sort of, fizzled out. But if we imagine that all of the Black student athletes that participate in the revenue generating sports were to walk away and boycott, okay, it would be a problem. That would be a major problem. And so when we try and undervalue the impact that the Black student athlete has on intercollegiate athletics, I think that's preposterous. I think that's something that is untrue, and is something that we need to pay more attention to.
And so, Dr. Martin, you just really, sort of talked about, the lack of representation throughout the athletics leadership pipeline. You sort of laid that out for us. So if we know most athletic directors are white, and I would say white and male, right? Is probably the case, particularly talking about, big programs and so forth. What is their role in terms of helping to create and build a pipeline to diversify it, to make sure that there is more representation of Black ADs as example, of women as examples? What should they be doing?
Yeah, well, I think in most cases, they enter these jobs and that's priority number 1,000 for them.
Right.
In terms of being able to really look, listen, and learn. They do their first 100-day plan. In that first 100-day plan, how much of it talking about diversity and equity and inclusion and student athletes? Not, in my opinion, maybe not much. Most of that is focused on fundraising. Most of that is shaking hands with donors. Most of that is facility projects. Most of that is an athletic director trying to prepare for their next job. Okay, that's just reality. And so, how do we get that to be at the forefront? I think it's conversations, and what you mentioned about. I just want to point out JD. What did JD do? He said, "Hey, I need to involve Dr. Harris in some of these conversations," and based off of the research that I've done and knowing the people on his executive staff, they're all committed to all of the things that we said, but there's not enough JDs, right? There's a lot of people, a lot of athletic directors who come in and they don't truly understand what higher education is all about. That's a problem, because there's so many resources in student affairs. There's so many faculty, like yourself, like Dr. Wood, who would want to, really assist athletics, right? There's so many folks, stakeholders within the campus community who want to come in and help. And so we really have to make it a priority beyond just saying, well, I want to make this a priority because I need my student athletes of color to be comfortable here so we can have athletic success. So it has to be genuine, it has to be authentic, and it has to be something that's worked on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
Because it's that critical.
So you and I both know, for as long as college athletics has been around, you could be a very successful athletics director and not care about or do anything about racial equity, not even mention it, right? About the stuff we're talking about here, you don't have to engage these issues. Historically, you haven't had to, and you can still have a promising career as an athletics director, right? And so in the past, those who have chosen to really prioritize it are those who care about it in a very authentic way. My sense from the outside looking in, and I would love your perspective on this, is that changing? Like, is being able to advance and prioritize and achieve racial equity, both in student athlete success as well as in the representation? Is that going to become a criterion by which athletic directors are evaluated? Is that going to be a part of the job description?
Well, it should be. Frank, it should be. It should
Right.
be. And now there's been a lot of efforts where positions have been created that are focused on D&I and equity.
So sort of like your chief equity or chief diversity officer.
Yeah, and I think that's terrific. We have a lot of good people in those roles, and it's good. But why should it take an athletic director to create that role just so they can get their bonuses, right? Just to say that, hey, you know what, you were supposed to make sure that your D&I, was in place, and so that's your motivation. The motivation shouldn't be about a bonus. The motivation should be is that you are an higher education administrator, not just an athletic director. And so when we think about the goal, right, and the aim of higher education, I think most ADs need to commit themselves to understanding how they can really immerse themselves into the fabric of higher education, beyond just the demands of athletics, which, hey, I'm a two-time athletic director. I understand what that is. But I think they'll find more success with going across campus and really being immersed in that campus culture, for the betterment of the athletics department, more specifically the betterment of student athletes.
Right. Because it seems like one thing that is happening is that there's more voice, like the shut up and play, the shut up and dribble culture, that seems to be eroding. When you have things like name, image, and likeness, for example, student athletes, I think, across programs, community college, division, all the NC2A divisions are now starting to, first of all, recognize that they have some voice. And second, they have venues to share their voice, right? They have social media and they're good at it. They're good at it, right? Yeah. And we see what's happened at the professional ranks. And so it seems to me that there has to be more of a partnership, right? It's sort of a three-part between the administration, the student athletes, and coaches. Like, you got to almost engage your student athletes as partners in this, and not try to control them or stifle them or silence them, which historically, programs and coaches have been able to do that pretty successfully. Yeah. But I want to.
Frank, I just want to add just want to add. So sure. I think it's also important, and this came up in the chat, to understand that you can have diversity and not have inclusion, right? That's important.
Yes.
And so
yes.
If you're going into it saying, hey, these are the numbers that I have within my department, but there's no inclusion and there's no voices heard, right? And hearing those voices takes commitment, a little bit more for the AD to do. When folks create these D&I committees or task force within athletics that has some prongs to across campus and the larger campus community, it's important that the AD has an opportunity to hear those voices, not just the student athletes, but hear the voices of the staff, hear the voices of the coaches, and really understand what are some of the educational needs that the staff needs to be better, better administrators, better coaches, so that can sprinkle down to the student athletes. I think that's important, right? Yeah. And so it's not just saying we need more education for the student athletes, and that needs to be the main focus. But no, we need education for the entire department, because they're going to send the education, they're going to send the the messaging and expectations, right, moving forward. And so I think we all need to be on the same page in the athletics department. So it's not just one-offs.
Yeah. So what you're describing really is about, cultural shift or cultural transformation, which is, again, I think we could add that to our list of future workshops, perhaps. I do want to be mindful of time. I think we have a few minutes left, so I want to ask the two questions I want to ask you. The last one is going to be give you an opportunity to kind of conclude with any final remarks. But one thing that before we go there, I don't know if this came across as strongly in your bio. So we know you're an athletics director and have been for a long time. You're also a vice chancellor for student success. But what many folks may not also know is that you have been a faculty member for almost your entire career, right? So like 15 plus years or so, you have taught graduate courses in athletics administration. You've served on dissertation committees. You have published articles. Obviously, you've written a book, but you've also published articles in research journals. And so you have played a key role in preparing the next generation of athletics administrators. And so how do you infuse everything that we're talking about today? How do you infuse that in your teaching and your mentoring of students who want to go into the profession
of athletics?
Yeah. Yes. My apologies.
Yeah. In my courses, we have some very candid conversations and figuring out exactly what role these students want to play. Some of them, some know more than others, but we do a lot of case study scenarios. And a lot of that is, around, some of the social justice issues. A lot of it is around, academic student development. A lot of it is about fundraising. And so what I like to do is I like to test, for a fraction of the semester. I like to test my students and figure out exactly their strengths and opportunities for improvement. And what I do is I meet with them one-on-one to figure out exactly what is their strengths, and we write that down and we put together a game plan for success for them moving forward, whether they're a first year, whether they're in the final year as a master's student, and then also connect them with different advisors, different mentors within my own network, and just connect them with people who can assist. I think transparency is really key, right? Transparency with the students and really offering them some real-time examples, and so there's a lot of different times when I'll go in and I'll teach, what happened in a given day. As long as it connects with our mission for that week or our focus for that week. And so I think one of the worst things that we can do is paint sort of an unrealistic picture for students about, what they will have to combat, for years to come, because these are our leaders moving forward. And so if we don't really throw them in the fire, they won't have an opportunity to be successful.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Before we offer you the opportunity to share any final remarks, how can folks get in touch with you if they want to follow up? Social media. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. Dr. Martin at KC. That on Twitter, Doc Brandon Martin. That's my personal website. Doc Brandon Martin on IG. Those are the three places where you can contact me, or my email at UMKC, which is Martin Brand at UMKC, MERTIN, Brand at umkc.edu.
Man, I remember your first email address at SC. It was Brando EM.
Brando EM. You remember that? That was years ago.
Right.
Yeah, that was years ago. Yep.
Yep. All right. So final remarks. What do you want to leave our audience with as they move forward and think about, all the important, we covered a lot of ground here. What do you, the things you want folks to remember?
Yeah, we did. I just want to pass on a few more thoughts just on some of the staff and administrators on a call who are working with student athletes and just on diversity, inclusion, and social justice moving forward. I just want to offer a few things that might be something they want to strongly consider. I think it's important that to create focus groups and trainings on systemic racism. I think it's important. Mm-hmm. A lot of our student athletes, they don't understand what systemic racism is. They think they're emotional, especially this summer, they're emotional. They want to do a whole lot of different things, but I think that's strongly important. Number two is in this age of protest and activism, I think it's important that as we not only have Black student athletes involved in this, it's important to, I think, talk about the myths and the facts about the Black community. There's a lot of different things that in the media and on TV, that are wrong, but some are right. And I think there needs to be some type of discourse in the athletic department to really unpack that. I think it's important to teach students how to use their voices constructively. I think that's important. And there's things that you can dovetail into that to where it's not so heavy, things like name, image, and likeness, which we're going to be talking about for I don't know how long. Number two is, maybe there's a student athlete who has a prospective job or an employer, learning how to use their voice with that. And then even a student athlete who's applying to grad school, learning how to write effectively and maybe use their voice on an interview with a faculty member or a dean. I think that's important. I also think there's some concepts related to diversity that are important to talk about privilege, to talk about empathy, to talk about the power of alliance, understanding equality versus equity. I think those things are really important. And I think it's incumbent upon athletic administrators, academic advisors to create the spaces to talk about that. A lot of this, they're not going to get in their other classes. And so I think that would be important. Another one is to conduct annual climate surveys in athletic departments with coaches and staff. That's important because we need to understand their opinions on the education that they need, because again, they have so much influence on the student athletes. And I think that's important. There's a ton of resources as you all strongly consider having roundtables with student athletes. I think that's important. Whether it's podcasts, there's a few that I've written down, like Code Switch, which is NPR, the Diversity Gap, Pod for the Cause. When you talk about books, Rosecraft by Karen Fields, How to Be an Anti-Racist is one, White Fragility. Those are the things that you need. The Fire Next to Me, that's an older book by James Baldwin, but those are the books that's going to give you really the tools and the meat that you need to be successful. And so yeah, those are some of the things that I wanted to pass on moving forward. I hope that Dr. Harris, at some point, maybe, I can get invited back to have a part two, just to chat about different things and move forward.
Well, listen, Doc, you're family, man. And so you don't ever need an invitation to family's house, right? You just let us know what you want to do, and we'll do it. We'll make it happen. Because again, I think a lot of what Luke and I do have implications for athletics, but we aren't operating in that space as directly as we need to be. And so I think kind of helping to bring these conversations together is really, I think it's going to be valuable for us as, scholars, however we identify ourselves, but also for our colleagues who we work with and partner with, and who really are looking to us to provide resources and counsel and, all the things that we talked about. And so I'm going to ask a couple favors of you. Can you just type your Twitter and Instagram, your social media handles in the chat? And then if you can follow up, maybe send out a tweet right after this with the book list you just laid out. I think that'd be great. Okay. And then, we always record our webinars. We keep them, so we'll make sure you get the link to that so we can send it out and share it to your network. But we appreciate you, man. We thank you. This is wonderful. Congrats again on this book. And maybe even drop a link to remind everyone. I know Luke did it earlier about how do you get leading in the unknown. Use this as a resource, right? Maybe if there's any athletic directors here, maybe this should be, a reading that the department can do, right, to start the year. So things like that, I think, are good. Anything else, man?
No, that's it. I just want to thank you, Dr. Harris, and Dr. Wood for this platform, and just appreciate, the participation. I mean, we had quite a few participants. On.
Yep, and I saw Sean Harper was in here.
Okay.
I think your frat brother and my good friend Kenny Donaldson, who's on the athletic leadership team at UCLA. We won't hold that against him, but he's in here. So there's a lot of good folks, man. A lot of good people.
Well, good.
I think some of my colleagues from SDSU might have been in here as well. Tim Lansky, and other folks. Yeah. So
awesome. Yeah.
Yep. All right.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Frank.
Sir.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Wood.